Welcome to the Chavrusa with Rabbi Levi Farkash, where we uncover the deeper meaning behind the Torah and powerful lessons it holds for our daily lives. In this week's Torah portion, Moshe gathers the entire Jewish people and begins with a powerful command. 6 days work may be done, and the seventh day shall be holy to Hashem. Immediately afterwards, the Torah shifts and begins describing the construction of the Mishkan, otherwise known as the Tabernacle, the dwelling place for the divine presence among the Jewish people. At first glance, these seem to be two completely different topics. One is about Shabbos, a day of rest and holiness. The other is about building, creativity, craftsmanship, and construction. Yet, the sages reveal that these two subjects are deeply connected. From the very work used to build the Mishkan, we derive the 39 categories of labor that are forbidden on Shabbos. And the Torah describes that work with a very precise phrase: melechet, calculated, thoughtful labor. Meaning, the work of the Mishkan was not random activity. It was intentional, deliberate, purposeful action. From here, the sages derive a remarkable principle regarding Shabbos. In order for an act to be considered a true violation of Shabbos, it must be intentional work, which leads to a deeper question. If the Torah places such emphasis on intentional action when it comes to transgression, what about when it comes to a mitzvah? If a person does something good, but without realizing it, does it still count? Today, we explore a powerful insight that emerges from this connection between the Mishkan and Shabbos and what it teaches us about the role of intention, awareness, and purpose in our divine service. Let's begin.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Chavrusa learning. We're going to be learning a fascinating insight thanks to Jewish insights regarding the association between the building of the tabernacle and the mitzvah, the commandment to keep the holy Shabbos, and the fact that they are mentioned in very, very close proximity to each other. What does that mean practically? Well, at the same time, what do we learn from the idea of what is the rule regarding transgressions done unintentionally, and at the same time, what is the rule regarding mitzvahs, positive action, commandments that are done unknowingly, and how does that apply to us today? Join us as we jump in to source number 1, Exodus chapter 35, regarding the Shabbos. Moshe gathered the entire Jewish people and told them, "These are what God has commanded to do. For 6 days you shall work, and the seventh day should be holy, a day of rest for God. Whoever works on this day shall die. Do not kindle fire in your encampments on the Shabbat." Moses also tells the Jewish people, "This is what God commanded to say. Bring from among yourselves a donation to God. Every generous-hearted person shall bring God a donation of gold, silver, and bronze." Then Moses said to the Jewish people, "See, God has chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, from the tribe of Judah, and God has filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and with all kinds of skills to make artistic designs, for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and engage in all kinds of calculated work." And so the sages tell us the fact that right after the commandment to build the tabernacle, immediately after we have the commandment to keep the Shabbos, the sages learn out that the 39 actions of labor that were required in the building of the tabernacle, if you want to know what does it mean to keep the Shabbos, it means that you should refrain from doing any action of the 39 actions of labor that were done to build the tabernacle. That's what it means to keep Shabbos. In describing the labor required to build the Mishkan, the Torah uses the words calculated labor. This means that the acts of building and creating the Mishkan required precision, foresight, and attention to detail. They could certainly not be done haphazardly, without intention, or by mistake. The sages derive this from another law regarding the Shabbos, that in order for an act to be prohibited, in order to violate the Shabbos by performing one of the 39 melachot, the 39 actions of labor that were done in the temple, it has to be calculated labor. It has to be a deliberate act, meaning that you only get a prohibition when you commit an act on Shabbos with purposeful intent to do a transgression. If, God forbid, unintentionally you performed one of the 39 malachot, the 39 forbidden labors on Shabbos, but it was by accident, seemingly the idea is that it does not fall under the category of transgression. Which brings us to a very interesting discussion. Does transgression require intent? Do I have to say, here, I'm doing an avera, I'm doing doing a transgression right now? Or anytime you do, whether knowingly or unknowingly, an avera transgression, it goes on your conscience. So the Rebbe explains that regarding the law that unintended violations are exempt from punishment, there is a disagreement regarding the authorities. Right? One opinion maintains the exemption only applies in the laws of Shabbos. Why? Because there's a unique clause in the laws of Shabbos that says only calculated actions are forbidden in response to the fact that it had to be calculated labor in the tabernacle. But in other areas of Jewish law, this opinion maintains that if the violation was done even without intention, it is still considered to be a transgression. However, majority of other halachic authorities disagree and say that anytime an individual does a avera, transgression, unintentionally, it is exempt from punishment. It does not go on the record. So now we see that there's a machloket, right? An argument. There's a strict opinion that says that in the laws of Shabbos, right, it has to be, in order to count as an avera, transgression has to be done with intent. And this is derived from the verse regarding the intent to build the tabernacle. So if you're going to violate the Shabbos by doing a labor action that was done to build the tabernacle, it also has to be done with intent. But the majority of halachic commentaries actually will say that the fact that it has to be intentional transgression extends to all transgression. It's not, it's not just to the laws of Shabbos. But that leaves us to another question: what about mitzvahs? Does the positive action of performing of a mitzvah does an individual need to have full focus to do the mitzvah, or even if they do a mitzvah without having the intention to do a mitzvah, does it go on the record? Does it count? So regarding the positive mitzvah, there's a disagreement also regarding if you need intent or not, right? The conclusion, the consensus is that there are some types of mitzvahs that are fulfilled even if you did the mitzvah without intent. However, right, it also extends that if you did a mitzvah against your will, it also counts. As we'll see, a very interesting source from the Alter Rebbe. Says the Alter Rebbe, all mitzvah require intent in order to fulfill the obligation of doing that mitzvah. If one did it without intending to fulfill his obligation, doing it in passing or in different intent, not for this mitzvah, they have not fulfilled their biblical obligation. Others say that the mitzvah do not require intent, and even when done in passing, has fulfilled their obligation post facto. Says the Alter Rebbe, an example: one who ate matzah without intent on the first night of Passover, meaning he did not intend to fulfill his obligation, he didn't have in mind that he's eating this matzah in order to do the mitzvah, he has fulfilled his obligation. Therefore, even if he did not wish to eat the matzah, and Gentiles and bandits, they came and they forced him to eat matzah, he also has fulfilled his obligation, because even though he didn't want to eat it, his body benefited from the food of the matzah. And with regard to intent, it seems to say that the Alter Rebbe holds that there is a difference between positive and negative. A negative mitzvah, according to most opinions, if the individual had no intent to transgress, he did not violate any prohibition. However, when it comes to a person who performed a positive commandment without intent, he has fulfilled the mitzvah. So if I don't have intent, according to most opinions, when it comes to doing a mitzvah, the mitzvah still counts. When it comes to transgression, if I don't have intent, the transgression doesn't count. So it's very interesting. We have what seemingly is a major difference regarding performing something, whether it's a violation or a positive commandment without intention, if it counts or not. Positive mitzvahs, it counts, and transgression, it doesn't count. The question is why? So the Rebbe continues, this difference requires explanation. Seemingly the reverse should be true. A mitzvah comes from the root word tzafta, which means to connect. The effect of a mitzvah is that a person connects to God. If he's doing a mitzvah with a physical object, that physical object gets connected to God. On the other end, a transgression has an opposite effect, right? It's disconnection, right? It basically disassociates the individual or any associated items from godliness. Before being associated with performance of a mitzvah or a transgression, all things fall under a category that's called kalipat noga, right? Something that could be used for negative, but it could also be used for positive, right? So the question is that if the default of something is that it's not yet used for positivity, right? It's still under the category of klipa, it's still under the category of potential negativity, then how can I take this item, how can I take this object and elevate it to a spiritual status of using it for a mitzvah without having the intention to connect, right? Anytime a person wants to have a conversation with someone, right? A business deal. You want to go out with your spouse or with a friend, or you want to kind of lock in. There's no such thing as connecting to an individual or something without intending to do so. You have to connect. You have to make the decision to connect in order to build the connection. But what we're trying to say regarding a mitzvah is that the Torah seemingly says that even though you don't have the intention to connect by still performing a positive mitzvah, even with items that needs the connection in order to elevate, it still considers to be elevation, which is very, very interesting because in this physical world where we deal with so much connection, the ability to connect unintentionally seems to be a little bit unique. Nevertheless, we are told that a mitzvah could be performed even without intent. Moreover, that it's not only that you don't even have to have intentional about doing a mitzvah, but even if, like the Alter Rebbe said in the Shulchan Aruch, even if it's against your will, even if you don't want to even do the mitzvah altogether, according to a lot of opinions, it still counts as a mitzvah. The Rebbe continues, if you look at the mitzvah of charity, right? A person can fulfill the mitzvah of charity without his knowledge. Yeah, if the law is that if a person loses a coin and a poor person finds it and derives sustenance from it, the one who lost it has fulfilled the mitzvah of charity. Since ultimately, what did he do? He provided a poor person with sustenance, and nevertheless, even though he didn't intend to do the mitzvah of tzedakah, because a poor person benefited, it still counted as a mitzvah. However, regarding transgression, even though material matters are naturally separated from God, right? Like we mentioned before about the klipat noga, and a physical act of transgression was performed with them, since the transgression was unintentional, it has no effect. Not only is the person exempt from punishment, but even a transgression is not considered to have occurred, and the action has no negative metaphysical effect at all, right? And the question is that why? So the Alter Rebbe says that the Alter Rebbe states in Tanya, that the whole idea of punishment is commensurate with the negative metaphysical effect of the transgression. Therefore, the absence of any punishment proves that the act had no effect at all. For had there been some effect, there would have been at least a light punishment. But again, the Rebbe says seemingly the reverse should be true, right? It should really be that if someone wants to disconnect, you don't have to have intention to disconnect. You just simply don't do. You just simply do a violation. You just simply let go, and you have done the disconnection. But no, according to Torah, Judaism holds that in order to do an avera, in order to disconnect from God, you have to want to disconnect. And here comes the fascinating explanation from the Rebbe on why what seemingly should be the reverse, that a person should have to have intention to connect to Hashem through a mitzvah, and seemingly not to have intention when one wants to disconnect through an avera. But nevertheless, the Torah says the flip, the opposite, that the Rebbe says that the insight is as follows. Maida, at the beginning of the day, right? Every Jew wakes up in the morning and says, Maida ani, right? How thankful they are to be able to live another day that God restored their soul. Says the Rebbe, therefore, even if the individual, after saying Maida ani, performed a mitzvah without any intent, the act is infused with the connection forged by the beginning of the day by saying my na'ani. If you start your day waking up by saying how thankful you are to Hashem for the ability to go about your day or restoring your soul, it must mean that your entire day is done subconsciously with the intention of thankfulness that you're able to have another day to connect to Hashem, which means even if you do a mitzvah that day and at the moment you didn't have any intention to connect to Hashem, but because when you woke up in the morning, you woke up with enthusiasm and passion and consciously you said that you're excited for another day to be able to connect to God. Therefore, even though at the moment you didn't think about connecting, but if you do a mitzvah, it results back, it reflects back on that initial desire to connect that you said. This is similar in regard to the idea of marriage. If a man and a woman were talking about marriage, and in the middle the man gave the woman a valuable item without exactly saying what was the reason why he gave her the item, but if he spoke about the idea of marriage, it's very, very sticky situation. According to the Torah, it's considered to be married, right? When someone is dating, right, or engaged, a person to be very careful not to give an item of value directly from the man to the woman and talk about the idea about that item is bound to the idea of marriage, because it could be that individual, even though without intention, but it could be that they're performing an act of acquisition and the marriage could technically happen. Right? Marriage and divorce, as the Rebbe, are very important issues. The Rebbe required everything be done in a clear manner with no room for misunderstanding. The Talmud gives a fascinating case. A man and a woman are talking about marriage, and then the man gives the woman a ring without saying a word. The law is that this constitutes a valid act of marriage because their prior conversation had shown their intent. So the Rebbe takes a lesson from the same way of Maidani, that when a person begins their day, they say Maidani, they express their desire to connect to Hashem. So even if a couple hours later you perform a mitzvah without the written or without the direct consciousness to perform an act of attachment to Hashem, but because it's an expression of your original desire that morning, so therefore it counts, right? Similar idea for marriage. But says the Rebbe, back to her question, this only is for positive mitzvahs. For transgressions, if the person didn't expressly intend to violate a prohibition, it's not counted, right? Such a non-purposeful act is like a body without a soul. In addition, as a result of saying Maida Ani and the like at the beginning of the day, we have at least a subconscious intent contrary to the transgression. All authorities, even those who maintain that mitzvahs don't require intent, concede that if a person had a specific intention not to fulfill a mitzvah, they haven't fulfilled it, and the same should be true for transgressions. Intention not to transgress should mean that the act can't be considered a transgression, right? Says the Alter Rebbe. Jewish law rules that one who does the act of a mitzvah but explicitly wishes not to fulfill the mitzvah has not done the mitzvah. Like the case of a person forced to eat matzah. If he does so unwillingly, only because he was forced, he has fulfilled the mitzvah, because mitzvahs do not require intent. However, if he had in mind that when he eats the matzah it will not be for the mitzvah, he has indeed not done a mitzvah, right? So one more additional idea that we learn from the idea of doing a mitzvah without the intention, that if you are forced to eat matzah against your will, yes, it counts as a mitzvah. But if while you're eating the matzah, you had in mind that the matzah I'm eating is not to do the mitzvah, then you have not fulfilled the mitzvah, right? So says the Rebbe, right? So says the Rebbe that the idea is that when a person says Maida'ani, because in the morning he's declaring that he wants to be connected to Hashem, so therefore, even if they transgress during the day unwillingly, because they're not having a mind to transgress, so they could still fall back on the idea that subconsciously their desire is to connect to Hashem. Right? Their desire with the statement of Maida'ani is to connect. So therefore, if they want to disconnect without having the intention to disconnect, then then you can't disconnect, because you're still connected with the intention when you said Maida'ani. But yes, if you do transgression with the willingness and the desire and the consciousness of disconnection, so yeah, then the power of connection that you built in the morning when you said Maida'ani, so yeah, then it becomes disconnected. But because usually when we wake up, we are thankful for having another day, so therefore we're connected, right? Therefore, if we do a mitzvah unintentionally, we're connected. Even if we do an avera unintentionally, we're still connected because we didn't consciously break the connection. It wasn't like we're disconnected, so now we're still disconnected. No, we are connected. And you have to intentionally break that disconnection. Now what happens if you don't say Maida'ani? So the Rebbe says that there's still a point that requires further clarification. The laws that mitzvahs don't require intent and that unintended transgressions are unpunishable are true for everyone, even those that don't say Maidani. Why? Because the truth is, each and every day, a Jew, deep in his soul, regardless of if he says Maidani or not, he wants to do good, right? The soul gives the person a subconsciously, at the minimum, a subconscious desire to connect to Hashem, right? So therefore, right? Therefore, you could use the terminology of someone that's occupied in the matter to this idea of not saying Maidani. What does that mean? Right? There's a law regarding sacrifices that a Kohen, a priest, right, that even though they lack the required intention while offering the sacrifices, that what the rabbinic court says, no, they had the intention. Why? Because at our core, right, everyone wants to follow, do the right thing. Everyone wants to follow the instructions and do their jobs properly, right? So the fact that the Kohen didn't have necessarily connect regarding his sacrifices, but because the court knows that the Kohen really at his core wants to, so therefore here we count that the sacrifice still is good. So says the Rebbe that even when a person doesn't recite Maidani with his mouth and consciously when he wakes up in the morning, but at the core of the individual, the neshama shines and expresses within the individual at the minimum with the subconscious that he wants to connect to Hashem and that he wants to do the right thing. So therefore, even if you wake up, God forbid, and you don't say the Maidani, and you're not conscious about that you want to use your day to connect to Hashem, nevertheless, the fact that you're in your soul, at your core, subconsciously, you do want to connect to Hashem. Your soul gives you that capacity and that ability. So therefore, you go about your day in a matter of connection. So if you do a positive mitzvah without consciousness, without intention, you fall back on that connection and it counts. And if you want to transgress, and if you, God forbid, transgress without intention, without connection, you also doesn't count because you are connected to God. You can't disconnect unintentionally from a connection. You ever tried disconnecting unintentionally? It doesn't work. Because at the core we're connected, so therefore the only way, God forbid, to disconnect is to do an avera with intention. Otherwise, we're all connected. And that's what we learn from this week's parsha. That's what we learned from the association, from the Shabbos to the Mishkan, and how it was 100% intentional that Hashem put these two commandments together to teach us that we're always connected no matter what. If we don't do a mitzvah with intention, it still counts. And if we do forced to do a mitzvah against our will, but we didn't have the intention to not count it as a mitzvah, it also counts. And even when it comes to, God forbid, doing an avera, a transgression, the only way a person can break away from the connection to God, and again, this connection is from the person to God. God to us never gets disconnected, right? A father's love for his children never goes away. But the child could run away, right? We could get disconnected from Hashem, from us to God. And if you want to break that connection, it has to be with 100% intention. And that's what we learned from this week's Torah portion. Thank you, everyone, for joining. The Chaim to connection and the Chaim to the Chavrusa.